There's been many weird trades in baseball that can be seen as a little bit of an insult to the players, make the team say, at least we got something, but they cannot say it here. During spring training in 2013, the Phillies traded pitcher Cisco to the Angels, and the return was nothing.
I hope you're hungry for nothing.
Cisco was a 36th-round pick back in 2008 out of South Carolina and was not really moving anywhere. The Angels needed some extra bullpen depth in the minors, and the Phillies essentially said, just go ahead and take him. Most trades involve at least some cash or some obscure prospect, and some guys have been traded for as little as $1. And this would involve nothing but a handshake. Cisco never made the majors, but he did pose a 3.99 ERA for the AA Arkansas Travelers, so definitely worth nothing. And Cisco can say he did more for the Angels organization than Anthony Rendon, while costing $245 million less. Long before Cy Young became Cy Young, and also the namesake for the Cy Young, he was just Den Young, a promising pitcher for the Canadians of the Tri-State League. In the early 1890s, the Cleveland Spiders were looking to bolster their pitching staff, and owner Frank Robinson spotted potential in this young pitcher, and it cost about $250 to $300 to sign him. And Frank Robinson got a brand new suit. And Den Young would become Cy Young because the fences looked like they were hit by a cyclone when he would throw his fastballs against them. And the reason the award for the league's best pitcher was named after him is because he was simply dominant, while setting records that will never be broken, winning 511 games, throwing 749 complete games, and pitching 7,356 innings. Those are 3 records that will never be touched because obviously the game has changed. And for the Spiders, he pitched 9 seasons and won 240 games, and helped them win the prestigious Temple Cup Championship. And all it cost them was a suit that Frank Robinson wore like twice. Joe Martina had a short career, but his trade gave him a famous nickname. Martina began his career in 1910 in the Texas League, and that's where he spent most of his 21-year career. And just one of those seasons was spent in the major leagues with the Washington Senators in 1924, where he won 6 games with a 4.67 ERA, and he won a World Series in his only major league season. But in 1931, while he was back in the Texas League, the Dallas Steers traded him to New Orleans in exchange for 2 barrels of oysters. No cash, no players, just some seafood. And from then on, Martina was known as Oyster Joy. Pitching for multiple decades is very impressive at any level, and he left behind some oysters that gave him a great nickname. And he won more World Series in one season than other players who tried for more than a decade, that they could have won by willing to be traded for some oysters. Sometimes teams offer a trade, but they don't say yes until there is a little more added, and it can't be seen here. Left-hander Keith Comstock had been bouncing around the minors for years, and in spring training '83, he was with the A's when the Detroit Tigers came calling, and their offer was for $100, and Oakland said no, so the Tigers really upped it. Not another prospect or $50 million, just $100, plus a bag of baseballs. And that sealed the deal. And the best part, Comstock had to deliver the baseballs himself when he reported to his new team. He actually made it to the majors in '84, and he bounced around teams until 1991. And the end, even more memorable than the bucket of balls trade, was in 1989. His baseball card for the Las Vegas Stars showed one of those balls heading straight for his balls. So the trade hit pretty hard in the end. While many have to go to great lengths to get a Thanksgiving turkey, one team did it by just trading one of their players. In 1931, John Binky Jones was a late-hitting shortstop with the Chattanooga Lookouts, and he wasn't loved by the local press. Team president Joe Engel nicknamed the Barn of the Bushes for his love of publicity stunts, such as having his players ride in on elephants and having Jackie Mitchell pitch against Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and strike them out. And he decided he had enough of Jones. So Engel traded him to the Charlotte Hornets, obviously the baseball team, for a 25-pound turkey that, in Engel's words, was having a better year. He even had that bird roasted and served at the Southern Baseball Writers Association dinner. Unfortunately, the turkey was a little dry, leading many to joke that Charlotte actually came out ahead in the deal. Jones would retire after the trade, and he became a vegetarian. There's many ways to pay rent, and back then, the Boston Americans did it by trading a future legend. In 1907, the Americans signed Trish Speaker out of the Texas League, and he barely got a look. He played just 7 games, hitting .158, and the team was unimpressed. And in 1908, Speaker even had to pay for his own travel to spring training in Little Rock, Arkansas, due to the team's uninterest. And at the camp's end, the team, who was now known as the Red Sox, essentially gave up on him, handing his contract to the Little Rock team as payment for using their ballpark during the spring. But there was a stipulation, as Boston reserved the right to buy him back for $500 if he ever turned into a great player. And he did. The Red Sox reclaimed him later that year, and Speaker became one of the best players of the dead ball era, recording 3,500 hits, winning an MVP, and 2 World Series with the Red Sox, as he went on to become a Hall of Famer and one of the greatest outfielders ever. So the Red Sox got to pay rent, then keep a future Hall of Famer, a better deal than they got in a trade that we'll cover later. The 1994 MLB player strike is mostly remembered for canceling the World Series and the damage it did to the game, but it also produced one of the strangest trades ever. As the strike began in August, teams were still operating under the hope the season might resume. On August 31st, the Cleveland Indians, chasing a playoff berth, acquired veteran slugger Dave Winfield from the Minnesota Twins. The deal was supposed to involve a player to be named later, but with the season officially canceled in mid-September, that player was never named later, and instead, the two teams settled over a nice dinner. Cleveland executives treated their Twins counterparts to a meal to close the books on the trade. Winfield, already Hall of Fame at that point, did play for Cleveland in 1995, spending much of it on the DL and hitting .191 in just 46 games, as he did not participate in the playoffs as the Indians won the pennant. So maybe Cleveland was nice enough to add some dessert on top of that dinner. As already seen, many great players are victims of these weird trades. And here's another. Before he became the best pitcher of his time, Lefty Grove was just a young pitcher for the Martinsburg Mountaineers in 1920. And that summer, a storm flattened Martinsburg outfield fence, and the team could not afford to replace it. So when the Baltimore Orioles, the International League, came calling, Martinsburg sold Grove for $3,500, the exact cost of building a new fence. Baltimore kept him until 1925, winning 108 games for them. Then they sold him to the Philadelphia A's for $100,600, which was more than the Yankees had to pay for Babe Ruth. And he was worth it, as he led all pitchers in B-WAR in 5 of the 6 final years with the team, while helping them win the World Series in 1930, and winning MVP in 1931 over the likes of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. Grove went on to pitch with the Red Sox for 8 seasons, finishing with exactly 300 wins, with 2 Triple Crowns and 9 ERA titles, as he was a first-ballot Hall of Famer. And it all started with a fence that could have just been fixed by finding some guy on Craigslist. Many managers have been traded for players or other managers, but a rare one is a trade for an announcer. Ernie Harwell is famous as a legendary voice of the Detroit Tigers, but back in 1948, he was just a young broadcaster for the Atlanta Crackers, his hometown team. And that spring, Dodgers radio announcer Red Barber was sidelined with a bleeding ulcer, and Brooklyn's GM Branch Rickey needed a quick replacement. And he set his sights on Harwell, but he was still under contract with the Crackers, and their president Earl Mann wasn't about to let him go without a deal. And a deal would be made, as Harwell went to the Dodgers in exchange for AAA catcher Cliff Dapper. Harwell called the Brooklyn Dodgers for a year, and Dapper hit .280 for Atlanta and spent the year as the player-manager. He only played 8 games in the majors in his career in 1942, while Harwell went on to be a broadcaster for the next 55 seasons, with 42 of those spent with the Tigers, as he would land in the Hall of Fame, while being the only one to say he was traded for a player. Trades are valued by what they got in return, and this one is as equal and one-sided as you can get. At the start of the Mets' inaugural season in 1962, they needed an experienced catcher, and they got Harry Chee from Cleveland in exchange for a player to be named later. And fast forward a few months, Chee was struggling at the plate, hitting just .195 in 15 games. And the Mets decided to cut their losses and sent the player to be named later back to Cleveland. And it was Chee himself. So in the end, both sides got a little bit of Chee, and he would never play another game in the majors. And he was not the last to be traded for himself, as similar situations took place 3 more times, with Brad Golden in 1980, Dickie Knowles in 1987, and John McDonald in 2005, all a part of trades that were perfectly balanced. The Cardinals-Cubs rivalry goes way back, and two got to experience both sides on the same day. On May 30th, 1922, Max Flack was playing right field for the Cubs, and Cliff Heathkit was playing center for the Cardinals. After they both went hitless in the game at Cubs Park, of course later being called Wrigley Field, the teams pulled off a rarity. They would trade Flack for Heathkit right after the game, both GMs seeing something in their hitless appearances. Both players then put on their new uniforms, and they switched dugouts immediately for the second game of the doubleheader, and both played right field. Heathkit went 2 for 4 for the Cubs, and Flack went 1 for 4 for the Cardinals. The Cubs won both games, but Flack and Heathkit each walked away with a win on their new teams. Going down in lower is one of the few who played on both sides of the rivalry, but the only ones who went to both sides on the same day. Plenty of times a player has just been sent over to the other dugout, as they just happened to be playing against their new team. But this is the only time 2 players just swapped in the same day. Almost as cool as Randy Johnson switching teams mid-fight. Our last one is a debatable one, and the most famous trade in baseball history. Everyone knows Babe Ruth was sold by the Red Sox to the Yankees, thus completely changing the future of baseball. But the reason why is part of baseball legend. As the Red Sox were struggling financially, Babe Ruth asked for a big pay raise, wanting his salary to go from $7,000 to $15,000. an amount only Ty Cobb was making, and they settled at $27,000 for the next 3 years. And after Ruth set a new home run record with 29 that year, Red Sox ownership knew that contract was not going to be enough. In December 1919, the Yankees gave Red Sox owner Harry Frazee an offer he could not refuse, and sold Ruth to New York for $100,000 in cash, plus a $300,000 loan. Officially, it was just a cash transaction, but the rumor is Frazee supposedly sold Ruth to finance the musical No No Nanette. That play did not open until 1925, by which time Frazee had already sold the Red Sox. But it was based on a Frazee-produced play, My Lady Friends, which opened in 1919. And of course, this would go down as the most lopsided trade, or selling, as Babe Ruth became the biggest star in the nation, while providing as much offensive value as some teams. The Yankees going on to be a dominant force, while the Red Sox would start an 86-year drought, known as the Curse of the Bambino, dating back to this transaction. So we can say Babe Ruth was traded for a play, although that is a stretch, as that particular play premiered 5 years after, and the Red Sox were in a tough position financially. But whether he was traded for a play, or money, or an oyster, there's no doubt, it was one of the worst moves in MLB history. A lot of these trades came from the early days of Major League Baseball, and they make sense with teams of course being financially trapped, sometimes needing money to pay for a fence, or for rent, or for dinner. And sometimes players just end up being traded for nothing, or sometimes themselves. And many small market teams now trade for the equivalent of a turkey sandwich, while their fans watch them blossom into a star. Hopefully you liked this video, and if so, please consider liking and subscribing for new videos every week. Thank you.